Call to order of a work session of Goodyear City Council to April 2007. 6 members of council are present today. One will not be available, Brenda Holland. We have 2 items on our agenda. No action can or will be taken. We'll start with the report by Corey Spiegel on the Airport Gateway Master Plan. And Corey, there's landowners and developers here. At an appropriate time, would you introduce or have them introduce themselves and tie them to the land?
Yes.
Okay.
We're ready. Mayor, Council, it's an absolute honor to be bringing this forward in the work session tonight. It's been 18 months of hard work. 4 quick things we're going to cover. We'll talk about an intro of the developer and investor group that is bringing this forward to you. I'll turn it over to SWA to talk about the master plan and all the pretty pictures that are hanging up and how they got to the vision for this project. And then we'll talk about next steps. Where do we go from here? We've got a vision in place, but how do we get to that first big building coming up? And what are the things we as a city can do? And how do we work cooperatively with the private sector? And that's part of the implementation. So at that 1216, landowners, Fred's not here, but it's comprised of 5 landowners. The top piece and kind of the blue color EJM is Eugene and Jerry Monkarsh, and Fred Stiles would be representing them. No. The second owner would be Cornwall Corporation, and Vic and Eric are here if you can stand up for a second. The developers of Bonita Business Park, where Community Development, Engineering, Fire, and PD are now. Claremont Capital, which is in the upper left-hand corner, Tom Palmer. Conan Investments, which is Bob Conan. George Reeves is representing him tonight. And then Sun MP, City Center Air Park. And I believe you all know Mr. Tupper very well. Let's talk about why this piece of property is so important. 3 centers of influence have really emerged in the city. The red is represented by Westcore and the regional mall development. The blue is represented by City Center, Ballpark Village, and the universities, kind of the civic heart of the city. So the green piece is the connection. How does this piece of property connect to both Westcore and all of the regional retail, as well as to City Center and the ballpark? And how do we as a city ensure that the vision meets our expectations, is financially sustainable for the private sector, and creates an opportunity for employment within the city? And with that, I am going to actually turn it over to SWA Group. Sean O'Malley and Bob Jacob are in from Southern California today to tell you more about the plan. If we can switch it over, Jeff, that would be helpful.
Okay. Yes, okay. I'll go ahead and hold this. I'm Sean O'Malley with SWA. We're land planners and landscape architects from Laguna Beach office in Southern California. And to begin a discussion of the Goodyear Employment Center and how we arrived at the design that we have today, I think we start by looking at some similar kinds of case studies, such as the John Wayne Airport along MacArthur Boulevard in Irvine. You can see the airport there in the distance at the top of the slide. Let me grab my pointer here. Right up there. This is MacArthur, of course. And over time, that area really has developed into quite a first-rate mixed-use environment of office, retail, and now residential. They're actually adding residential uses at the bases of some of these of the collector roads to the rear and outside of the park area itself. Oftentimes when we begin these projects, we start with what we call the napkin sketch. I guess this is a real napkin sketch. When you talk about a project of this magnitude, 1,200 acres roughly, perhaps 12 to 16 million square feet of office space, and amongst other uses, you really have to develop a plan that stands the test of time, that has flexibility, that has basically a strong framework. So what you're seeing here basically is here, I'm back. Okay, great. Bullard Avenue really being the idea of a strong commercial core and framework, and from that major, what we call an image and identity road, a series of clusters that develop along that spine. And you can see here really you're connecting these clusters along that spine with a series of collector roads that come out and integrating the idea of drainage into an entire landscape framework that allows this flexibility to happen over time. And that the land uses really start to respect the property values that really happen once we create this wonderful street along Bullard here. So you're seeing here what's represented by orange and red, a series of commercial and retail areas along Bullard, and then the purple on the outskirts here close to Litchfield would be some of the light and heavy industrial areas. So it's kind of a banding of uses relative to property values. And then from that, now we've derived a land use plan that shows really a variety of mixed uses. So when we think of an office park or an employment park, it's really more than just employment. It also includes retail uses that service the employees, such as restaurant facilities and so forth, that can be clustered. Again, the idea of clustering uses, bringing those uses together to create a critical mass, I think is a very important and workable idea. With some of the light industrial and heavy industrial uses really pushed out to the edges here along the Litchfield edge. The yellow areas being what we call flex tech, and I'll get into that a little bit deeper and explain what that really means. The orange being an idea of a higher end office use, such as an office between 12 and perhaps even 15 floors. This is an example of what we call a flex tech project in Irvine that we've worked on in the past, where you can see the buildings start to come together and cluster, and what that does is allow for some common open space areas that can be shared and add value to this facility. Now, we would like to take this a step further and take these landscape areas, which could be used for retention and so forth, at a requirement, and make those visible, so as you drive into or through these development areas, you see that landscape and it adds value to the entire community. So we've taken that idea and developed a series of these flexible clusters that could be developed in these cells. You can see here with the collector roads coming across. This is Bullard down the middle. This is the retail core right here. So this really is the heart and soul of the employment center here. This is an example of what one of those clusters might look like as those buildings are really brought together, some of the common green areas. An example of what one of these clusters might look like on the ground. And we try and do the same thing again with some of the higher end buildings. Those are, this would be located along the bollard would be in this location here. With parking structures, we see this as really a parking structure type of land use along this higher end property valued area. This is an example of a typical mixed use development, such as you see in Carolyn's, with the retail down below or office and residential above. And an example of a typical light industrial or heavy industrial site plan, with some of the retention areas being the green area here that's required for each site. And then we can start to see how this plan can really start to come together here. Let me orient you on this slide. This is the 10 freeway, and this is Bullard right here. This red area is our idea of clustering the retail, bringing that together, create a critical mass. And these yellow areas are these clusters of what we call flex office, with some of the higher end towers being located along Bullard Avenue. The airport is out here. And then as we zoom in closer, you start to see this really starting to come together. Again, this is Bullard Avenue right here. This is Bullard Wash with the Flex Tech office clusters and the office tower clusters in that location. Again, this is really just the core of the project. And I'd like to reiterate how important Bullard is, because when we really drive around Phoenix, or any city in the world for that matter, you experience the city from the street and nowhere else. So the street is very, very important. And we have been working with the engineers here to develop and refine the street cross sections to make what we think can be a very exciting and beautiful street, particularly Bullard Avenue being the framework of the entire project. And this is a very small diagram on the slide here of a landscape, kind of a master plan that shows some of the idea of the green framework. You can see these little green splotches are where some of the shared landscapes start to come together from the office clusters. That same plan is right over here on the wall. You can look at it later for further detail. What's important, too, here, of course, we can't forget the connection to the airport. We have a direct connection to the airport right here, right off of, as Bullard comes down and turns, right past Yuma, right here, and to what we hope that would be the future expansion of the northern runway of the airport. This is an enlargement of Bullard Avenue that talks about really three different kinds of landscapes that relate to the land uses behind them. So we have really a landscape on top that's relative to the flex office, a landscape that's relative to the office tower clusters, and then one that relates to the retail. And really it's about transparency. As you move closer in to the retail uses in the core, in the middle of the project there, we want to be able to see through those trees and see the signs of the retail buildings. This is an example of the landscape along relative to the flex office areas, where you have a more denser planting of very stately, tall trees. So when you drive on the 10 freeway and you look down Bullard, we want people to say, wow, that's incredible. And I think the entire property group is committed to really building and creating this kind of very special, important environment. And as you move further down Bullard, and you get into the buildings start to become a little taller, it becomes a slight more transparent, and perhaps we see the introduction of palm trees, in this case perhaps Washingtonias, with smaller Palo Verdes and mesquites behind, providing a shaded walkway for the pedestrians. This is an example of some arterials that we just recently designed for the city of Anaheim and Disney in a partnership, really giving a facelift. And Bob Jacob, my partner here, sitting over there next to the wall with a beard, wave hi Bob, was really a big part of this project. He was in charge of overseeing the design and construction of probably one of the largest streetscape projects in the United States. Really transformed the city of Anaheim and really made it feel like a resort area. Now, our ground plane wouldn't be as green, but we could do similar kinds of things here on Bullard Avenue. An example of how some of the office tower landscapes can really kind of start to look like. And also how the parking lots, it's very important that the parking areas, particularly when the areas closer to Bullard, are treated differently than the light industrial, heavy industrial areas further out. Perhaps the tree density is bumped up as we get closer to Bullard. And then as we drive down Bullard further next to the retail, where the retail greets the street and wraps around the edges, there's an introduction of shade canopy trees for the walking environment. And then you turn the corner down what would be a very beautiful Main Street kind of condition. We'll talk about that right now. This is an example of perhaps what the shade tree canopy could become along Bullard, where the retail greets that avenue. And then very briefly, I want to talk about the collector streets, which are kind of secondary importance of Bullard, but nonetheless, they really bring all the different land uses together. And the idea here is to really create a tall vertical density of tree planting that creates a series of outdoor rooms. And these are examples from some of the projects that we've designed and built. And use of ground plane materials that you're very familiar with here in Phoenix. They can be very beautiful, native stone and ground covers, seating areas along some of these pathways where these tall trees can create really beautiful environments to sit and check your email all the way to lunch. And so we'll have lunch at the mixed-use retail street, which is, I think, the kind of mixed-use project that you're familiar with, for example, here in Carolyn's, which incorporates retail at the ground floor and office and residential above.
Isn't that great?
We built similar kinds of projects. This is Santana Row in San Jose. And I think this is an image you see here on the wall behind you of what really we think this employment center can become. Thank you for your time. I'll turn it back to Corey at this.
Jeff, no, perfect. All right, so there were the pretty pictures. Now how do we get there? You have a larger version of this. I realize it's pretty difficult to read. We're really in the 02 to 06 time frame. This plan looked at both the general plan as well as the employment corridor study that Brian and ASU and Harvey had worked on in 2003. So we're at the vision block, and we're about to cross a line into three very critical phases. One being the public process, and I'll look at that in a little bit on the form of a slide, but some of these properties are entitled, some have a PAD from 1987 that's very outdated compared to where we're going. So we'll look at the entitlement phases, zoning. We'll also look at either an overlay district or a specific area plan to protect the integrity of Bullard and to ensure that we can really create a long-term vision along Bullard. And then we need to look at development agreements, normal procedural stuff, but through that whole time also looking at Phoenix Goodyear and how this will impact their operations and their master plan as part of that, and you'll definitely hear more from Brian on that next week. While we're doing all that, we need to look at infrastructure, which is part of all of those processes, and not only our own infrastructure in terms of streets and water and sewer pipes, but really on the capacity end. If we're going to create this intensity along Bullard, which we hadn't anticipated in the past, do we have capacity down at the wastewater plant, or do we even have the water resources to come into the facilities? And those are planning things we need to look at. And then we also need to work with our private partners. APS needs to provide power to 12 to 16 million square feet. When we met with them, by example, they said this is more power than downtown Tempe, including ASU takes. So working with them to not only provide the power, but to ensure that substations are placed correctly and aren't visually detracting from the vision. Telecom, gas, and even Wi-Fi. I think part of the opportunity in creating this area from scratch is that we can put in all of the next generation infrastructure and really create an urban place that's sustainable both for the visitors as well as the employment uses. And that leads into financing. The CIP is one mechanism, and improvement districts a possible mechanism. Suncor's used the community facilities districts as a mechanism, but we need to identify what uses would be most appropriate. And maybe it's not all 1,200 acres, maybe it's 400 acres here and 400 acres in various spots. So we really need to break it down into sizable and workable pieces. Through each of these processes, we'll be coming back to you with the zoning and the development agreements and then the infrastructure planning. How does this impact the CIP? What's already addressed? And how do we move forward on creating this? As we start actually developing infrastructure, that's when we get into the shovel-ready sites so that we can really be competitive when these users are coming to town. And we stand out on Bullard, and it's not a dirt road, that it is a beautiful boulevard, that they can see their building being one of those buildings. Because I think the key for all of us is March 2009 is a very important date for this community in both first pitch of the ballpark as well as the mall opening. And I think those two pieces are going to be connected by Bullard Avenue. And if we can put our best foot forward along that roadway, we can be very competitive and very attractive to our 10,000 visitors from Cleveland and elsewhere, and the people as they come into this community. By example, the image that's up there now shows the general plan and existing zoning. The light pinkish colors, light industrial, you can see that kind of matches. We've still got some ag zoning in there. We've got some heavy industrial. So we've definitely got lots of entitlement cases coming up to you. How the conceptual master plan affects the general plan. We need to identify, is there a minor amendment, a major amendment? The things that are new that weren't part of this is the commercials all moved to the center around Harrison, and there's a potential residential component, which wasn't anticipated in the past. As we've seen in Tempe and Scottsdale, it works very well, and it attracts the types of employers that I think are very attractive to us, and that's a nice amenity to offer. But there are definitely things we need to weigh against to make sure it's done right. And here's the infrastructure one, which is, you also have a handout because it's about as equally easy to read. When I came to you last October and said, and here's the bad news, we've addressed a lot of those things. We're putting another lane on Bullard from I-10 to Van Buren. ADOT's building 2 lanes along Bullard from Van Buren to Yuma. The city's putting in a 3rd lane. But there are still some things that aren't addressed. Sewer line in Yuma, there is still some sewer issues outstanding on Bullard. And then there's several lanes. You'll see in the gap that there's basically 3 lanes in some of those roads that still, haven't been identified. And one of the new things, the 4th row down, is the airport entrance. When I came to you in October, that, we had contemplated that was a possibility, and I think we're going to find out that it's a very real possibility in the near term that we need to address that opportunity as part of the infrastructure planning for this. And this is the map that I sent to you. The lighter versions were what we had talked about in October, and the darker versions can say, Van Buren's under construction. That's a real thing that's happening. We've addressed Bullard down to Van Buren by adding 1 lane. We're adding 3 lanes between Van Buren and Yuma. And then the low-flow crossing at Lower Buckeye over the bridge to serve the stadium.
Can you slow down? I'm serious. Just say it so that we pick everything up here.
Okay.
Okay. So you're at I-10 and then heading south on Bullard.
Right.
Okay. Would you just say that again?
Sure. If we start at I-10, we've got 2 lanes existing on Bullard to Van Buren. They're in the CIP. There's a 3rd lane. So that's already addressed. But that still leaves us short a median.
So that'll be 4 lanes? Or is there
No, it's just the 2 that are existing plus 1. So there will be 3 total. So we'll be short a median curb, gutter, sidewalk, and 3 lanes. If Bullard's a 6-lane arterial build-out. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there's one north and 1 south, and you're going to add 1 lane.
1 lane total.
So that'll be 3 lanes
Correct.
in both directions.
No, total.
That's what I mean. It's
Right.
not 3 north and 3 south.
Right. So there will be 1 north, 1 south, and I'm guessing one that serves a multi-purpose lane type of feature.
Otherwise known as a suicide lane.
Raul's corrected me on saying that several times, so I'm going to go for multi-purpose lane.
And the ultimate is planned for when? Or is it?
It's not. That's one of the gaps. We've got a 3-lane plus a median plus curb, gutter, and sidewalk gap
To bring it to a total of 6 plus median.
to bring it to what Estrella or Litchfield would look like.
So then we would have this 3rd lane that, like, sometimes it would go north and sometimes it would south. Is that correct?
Yes.
Go left.
I.e. the baseball
Traffic would go
goes south to the game and north.
right.
So, okay.
So that would be the interim solution, but not the full-term build-out. As you hit Van Buren now, you hit a dirt road. For that stretch of mile, 2 lanes will be going in the very near future, and that's ADOT MAG. And then we are adding a 3rd lane. So same configuration.
And we're doing that at the same time, right?
I believe
We're designing
it's
that in conjunction.
after.
Raul?
Can we, since we're on the subject, can we, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask why we aren't doing it at the same time?
ADOT money versus city money and design.
That's correct. It's a ADOT-funded project, so if we add a 3rd lane, what we've asked for, we would have to restart design and possibly lose that funding. So right now, we're proceeding with just 2 lanes down Bullard Avenue.
Between Van Buren and Yuma.
Correct.
Okay? So you're going to have 3 lanes north of Van Buren and 2 lanes south.
Right. And then there's funding in the CIP to add the 3rd lane.
So ADOT's underway on design on that right now. And if we slowed it down and said we wanted to add a 3rd lane, we'd potentially loss of funding.
Exactly. We've got, design is about 100% design at this point, and we anticipate going out to bid late this summer with construction by fall.
We're going.
Well, ADOT's going, actually.
ADOT's going out to bid.
Right,
Through
ADOT
our procurement process.
through their procurement process. ADOT is administering the contract.
What's the length of the design? If you were to restart a design, how long would it take?
We're looking at approximately, well, that's not including right-of-way acquisition. Right now, we only have enough right-of-way for 2 lanes. So if we were to restart design, we would start the right-of-way acquisition, which is typically taking about 6 to 18 months at this time, and design would be concurrent with that for about 6 months or so.
But the right-of-way acquisition would be from the people in this room,
Exactly.
which obviously they want to move with haste.
Right. Now, this is a new development, so maybe this might be leverage to acquire the necessary right-of-way for the third lane and beyond.
Okay, sorry, I got to ask this question. And ADOT didn't evaluate any alternatives above and beyond 2 lanes.
Correct. Those are the minimum requirements for our PM10 program.
Okay,
So just 2
okay,
lanes.
so this is all just to meet PM10 requirements.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So then how do we acquire the right-of-way for the other 3 lanes down the road on that?
Well, it's either through abstract improvements with a developer. As they develop, they would be obligated to do their improvements. Or, as we did with Van Buren project, we would acquire the right-of-way, go through a cost recovery type ordinance, and recover those costs. So there's options.
Third choice, improvement district.
Yeah, we could look at going to the ultimate build-out of Bullard as a spine in total through one of the other mechanisms, be it a CFD or an ID. And as an ID, the landowners are all participants, so they're as equally motivated as we are.
Mr. Mayor, if I can add to this, and maybe context, the design started almost a year ago. This project, the proposal you have in front of you, is about 2 months old in terms of being brought to the city for discussion and rolled forward to this. The discussion tonight and the proposal as identified by the development community could very well tear out the existing 2 lanes that are being built by ADOT because they do not conform to their greater master plan, which is much different than where the city had been heading, which was not to have a landscape boulevard. It basically would have been more of the traditional industrial corridor, truck traffic with turning median and stuff like that. So we're taking on the benefit of the ADOT monies, get it going, timing it for the stadium, and the extra traffic there that's going to be impacting movement. Estrella Parkway would be overburdened if we didn't go ahead and move forward with this project. And we have to work with the development community exactly on how they want their cross-section to look and where those 6 lanes are really going to sit. So they have to do some homework in terms of us moving forward. Whether or not we would immediately come forward with the 3rd lane that we were proposing in the CIP or roll that money into this project strategy that they're coming forward with is also part of the next conversation.
And the time difference in time frame is?
It is really in their hands, how quickly they want to move forward. And if they do not, let's say they didn't want to move forward for 3 years, we'd probably come in and say, we need to go ahead and lay down a 3rd lane of asphalt, and it'll be subject to whatever their ultimate plans call for reconstruction.
Now, what about the other 3 lanes to finish out the 6 lanes? Who will be responsible for that?
Essentially, under one of the options, the development community is paying for those 3 lanes. They may end up paying for all 5 or 6 lanes of future because we have gone in and thrown away what is being built under the existing scenario. And they could do that under an improvement district and capture that money back through property assessments. They could advance dollars to the project for construction. They have various vehicles by which they can finance that, and we want to be a partner in that effort.
So we will hold them to that so that they will, if they want to build on there, they will have to commit something so that we get our 6 lanes in.
Under the traditional model, basically what we're having constructed under ADOT is what the city would contribute of the 6-lane road, and 2 lanes would be constructed by the fronting property on either side.
Okay.
So the remaining 4 would be constructed by them under the traditional model.
But 2 lanes are the responsibility of the developer.
Yes, and 2 lanes by city for the regional impact.
And I think the balance there is if they construct all 6 lanes, they will do it on their time frame. And that may be 2 years from now, and that may be 20 years from now. And that's really where the partnership comes in, that, you know, we need to identify what we need and how we phase it in to meet both of our expectations.
The nice thing is they are very motivated, so that brings us to the table as a partner in that effort.
So as we come down Bullard, we're now going to hit Yuma. Yuma itself is in the CIP in the out years, which is beyond the 5-year time frame, and that includes a bridge and, you know, 6 lanes, probably similar to the fashion of Van Buren, where it tapers down as it gets closer to Litchfield because of the airport and some of the uses that constrain it there. As you head southbound on Bullard, there are really 2 segments. There's the segment that turns into Lower Buckeye, which will go between the ballpark and Sun and Pease property, and then the practice fields. And that's being addressed as part of the ballpark project. It's the road that exists there now that doesn't connect over the wash. So we're looking at a low-flow pass similar to what was on McDowell and Van Buren before the bridges were going to go in as an interim solution, but we'll come back and do a 6-lane bridge in the future if it's deemed appropriate. And then the final leg is from Lower Buckeye down around the airport, which connects into Elwood and ultimately Estrella, which is 6 lanes. 4 of those lanes are part of the ballpark and the infrastructure for spring training. So the road work, we're making progress through the CIP, but there's definitely a big gap between where we are today and where we need to be. The water's a much better story. The lines are all dotted, or not dotted, which I think is the key point, that most of the major infrastructure is in already. So we're actually in pretty good shape when it comes to water infrastructure all around. There is some work that needs to be done on Litchfield in the future to serve that part of the city, specifically south of 85, but that's kind of a separate service area than what we're affected by here on Bullard. And then wastewater's where we're still missing a few big pieces. The trunk line's in Bullard Wash, but we're missing Bullard all the way to 10 from Yuma, and then the stretch on Yuma itself. So there's some pretty big lines that are still out there missing. So when users come in, we have water, but we have no cost-effective mechanism to get them wastewater capacity at this time, or even access to the wastewater system, unless they're right on the wash, which is not served by streets. And that's kind of it. So I'll jump back, actually, to this one, which the gap, the last column, is really what we're missing. And I think Stephen hit it, that those 3 lanes plus median may really be 4 or 5 as we have to tear out street that's already been laid down.
What is CGS again?
Curb, gutter, sidewalk.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Let's open up for discussion here. Well, before I do that, are there any comments from the public? Would like to state anything? Okay. Councilmember Souza?
What concerns me is the last statement you made, tearing up streets. And, this is something that we've got to try to avoid in the future. There's no question about that, because we're spending money and then we're throwing money away. And if we can plan accordingly, I think it's important for us to do that. This project, to say the least, is exciting. No question about it. And what's the time frame? Is it 20 years?
Build out from, Vanita is going to have the first project crown from here to eternity, but it will grow up around it, and it's realistically probably 20 years to build out 1,200 acres.
Of the 5 developers, which one has indicated that they want to put the shovel in the ground first?
They're all interested.
So, well, that's exciting in itself. So it's a project that has uniformity as far as the developers are concerned. They're excited about the area. The area, I think, is dynamic, and connecting it with, what we've got going right now, and for the future. That's the ballpark, okay. And certainly it is the retail area to the north, Australia Falls, tying that in with this project. It takes your breath away when you really sit down and think about it, as we found out earlier. Another partner in this, and you say that Brian is going to come to us next week, is the airport. I'm really actually excited to hear what they have in the future plan for the city of Goodyear. We don't really have a municipal interest in the airport because the property is owned by the city of Phoenix. How are we going to dovetail this to where it becomes important to the city of Goodyear? Where do we get some revenue out of what is going to happen in this property? And here again, it becomes important for us to have a relationship with the city of Phoenix to determine exactly what they're going to do in the future, like i.e. commercial flights in and out. Is it going to be? Are there going to be commercial properties that are going to be coming into commercial airlines rather coming into the city of Goodyear? And we're going to have to contend with the noise, or are we seriously going to have just private planes landing at the Goodyear, Phoenix Goodyear Airport? Those are some questions that I have. We'll have with the airport when we meet with them. So all in all, sitting in this seat, I hate like heck to keep using the word exciting, but it is exciting for the future of this city. The employment corridor, we're talking about 20,000 jobs, and I like the idea of making available, residential areas for the people that are going to be employed in these buildings, and in the businesses that are going to become a part of it. I like that aspect of the plan, and the keeping people here rather than putting them on the highway morning, noon, and night to get them to and from their jobs, which shouldn't happen. That would add to the problems we have on the interstate and our local streets, as a matter of fact. So that's what we have to keep in mind also. Mr. Mayor, exciting is the word I would use, and I don't know how else to describe it. It's dynamic, no question about it. When Corey Forrest first brought this to Rob, Frank, and I several weeks ago, I walked out of there just shaking my head. I'm not going to be a part of this, down the line, but we're going to certainly be a part of it in the start. But the future that this holds for the city of Goodyear is great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Antonio?
Yeah, I can't really say much more. It's exciting, thrilling. For the first time sitting here on council, I can see myself working down the street from home. So that's a big thing. I have had a round trip of anywhere from 100 miles, 110 miles to now down to 35 miles into the downtown Phoenix area. But this is the kind of place that, as I've been in the employment market here in Phoenix, I've seen the residential locations of employees shift from east to west, and it's still growing. And it amazes me in the major financial corridors or the major employment corridors of the valley how much that is shifting. And there are a lot of folks, and it's starting to, this equilibrium is happening. It's like, where do you live? You live in Goodyear. Oh, I didn't. It's amazing to me that that's occurring. But at the same time, we're all talking about we hate the drive, we hate the drive, we hate the drive. And so it's exciting. I think you've got, there's a fantastic talent pool in the West Valley, Northwest Valley, Southwest Valley that will all come to this location for their employment on a daily basis. That said, things like the roads, if there are opportunities to get with ADOT on that particular road and value engineer the heck out of the thing, and if there's reserve left over to bank that and hold it for a future date, let's not put sidewalks in where there's nobody walking at this juncture. I know there's PM10 requirements, but be rational about those requirements and rational about the expenses that are going in. But yeah, I could make a very compelling case for almost any employer to look at something like this in the very near future, in the next 5 to 10 years, to move out here, because they definitely would find the employees and find the marketability of this location. So it's exciting. A lot of hurdles to overcome in the infrastructure, but just got to get moving.
Councilmember Lord.
Well, it's been all said tonight, but I guess the key is use all the mechanisms we can and complete Bullard. That's all I have to say.
Councilmember Osborne.
Well, I won't let you know that it only takes me like 2 minutes to get to it. But, a couple of things. Dynamic was the word that I was going to use. Truly, this is actually the vision I have for the airport area. I see it all across the valley. This is what I think will go with it completely. I do wonder if there are mistakes that have been made in these air parks that we have in other parts of the valley that you're learning from. I don't know if Deer Valley is a good example or a bad. It never seems to have been as great of an airport area that obviously Scottsdale Air Park has. The retail corridor, do we have, I'm not real sure if we have an actual size that's acreage. I mean, if it's in the sense of a Carolyn Commons, which I happened to be there yesterday, if that's going to compete with our mall, I just was curious of how large that this was going to be.
Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember right around 50 acres, which...
It's consistent with the general plan of the state retail.
Okay.
We took retail off of the corners where typically among materials. It still is some next to freeways. That's a rational thing to do. But some of the other areas use clustering.
Corey, he has to come up to the mic. Sean, start over, please.
Okay. It's more like about 60 acres, I think, the mixed-use retail portion of the core there. And basically, we took a lot of the retail that was in the current general plan is shown typically on the arterial corners and clustered that. Of course, we left some of the retail adjacent to the freeway and some of those arterial corners to the north because that's a rational thing to do. I think it makes a lot of sense. But overall, the acreage is meant to be consistent with the general plan.
I guess the last bit, which I'm not saying is a detriment, but I would like some discussion at some point to take place on the heights of our buildings across the landscape of our city. We all agree that there's areas that they should be, but I would certainly like to see something that is set a little more in stone than having clusters of high-rises all over the city. And this is certainly not, in my mind, a place that shouldn't be. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that as we progress, that's something that I will continue to ask about. And besides that, it's great. I think you've hit all the things that we've been looking for, especially with a little bit of the flex office and residential mixture. I think that's going to be an appropriate mix, with some corporate bigwig that wants to have his little apartment over his, I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I think with the future of what we want for the city of Goodyear, it looks good. I know there'll be revisions that we'll need to look at later on, but as it stands now, it's a good start, and I have no problem with it. Let's get it going, and let's get these developers on board, and let's make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment. Infrastructure is the issue here, and it's very complex. I think it's more complex, much more complex than the mall, and it's probably more complex in the city center because you've got 5 major landowners who are going to derive income over differing periods of time. And therefore, how do you bring together them to handle the costs up front? But this is something that we might think, this is moving now into engineering and finance. And we might need a czar for this, airport area czar or something. Someone who works with the developers in the city and is the single mind to bring this whole thing together. This is extremely complex, and we need the jobs. And we need them sooner rather than later. So.
Jim, don't czars usually have money?
No.
No.
No, not my kind of. I guess Nicholas did, didn't he? Yeah. But no. So anyway.
That was a problem.
Appreciate everybody coming, and again, I offer the opportunity if anyone wanted to speak. You're certainly welcome to still do that. Okay, Barney didn't welcome you, but so glad you came too. Okay, and Corey, you introduced everybody else, I think. Oh, Fred wasn't here.
Fred did a late appearance, so wait.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You'll see them, they'll have something. The reason, I know we've got a lot of talk about keeping the.
One question Sean didn't answer was about this retail is really targeted for shoppers, the people who are working
Being able to take the lunch break.
it's going to be a bit, I'm not saying people won't go down there. It's really dependent on serving different
Real estate today. The only way we can get these developers in here is to go
Oh, I understand that, but
That doesn't mean the whole thing will be
no,
that.
that's my point.
Everybody want to take a break? Are you okay?
It's just like my thing, there's an uptown and there's a downtown. And,
Hey, Lynn.
You need a break?
Do you need a break?
I think you have to listen to this. I hate this part of it.
Finance.
But these guys.
Well, that's my part of my job.
Bad doing income tax.
Larry?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight, I want to review with you what I'll call the City of Goodyear financial plan, but it mainly is a discussion about the budget and the capital improvements plan, where we are in the process, and where we expect to be going. Probably as a review, the City Council adopted the 2006-2007 budget. The tentative budget was adopted in May of 2006, and the final budget was adopted in June of 2006. But the work didn't really end there. In September 25th, we came back and visited with a few changes and assumptions that the City Council, or that happened since we adopted the budget. And one of those was the application of more money towards major project needs, very similar to the subject matter you just discussed. How do we get more capital into the projects that are reaching out for us and needing additional funding? November 17th, we had another session that talked about the CIP funding sources and restrictions. And again, the focus on that session was how do we increase the amount of money available for capital projects and for a number of projects that have been talked about for years, but we don't seem to be making the progress you'd like to see on. And some of the emphasis on that was a shift. We started talking about a shift in the growth of our operating revenues, reducing the growth of the operating revenues to allow more of that money to shift over in the capital side, allow us more money available for bond financing, which allow us to do more capital projects up front. Tonight, we're going to do a little bit of an update on that, as well as talk about the budget process. Also wanted to answer a question that was left hanging from the capital improvement plan presentation of about a month ago dealing with debt financing. Following this, we have a couple of work sessions planned. One is on April 23rd. That's before a council meeting to discuss the budget, and that's where we'll present the budget to you. Another one scheduled for May 14th, which is also immediately prior to a city council meeting. We're proposing, with your permission, we're proposing scheduling a special work session on May 7th that would be devoted to the budget with the two 45-minute sessions. I don't think that'll give a lot of time for you as a council to provide input into the budget. It'll be more us telling you what's in it, and that, of course, is not what this process is about. And so we'd like to schedule that for May 7th, where that would be the focus of the discussion and allow a little more time for a dialogue in that discussion. In the budget adoption process, the tentative budget will be presented on May 29th for approval by the City Council. Final budget is scheduled for June 25th, and the property tax levy is scheduled for July 9th. In addition to these meetings, I will be available to meet with any one of you individually or in smaller groups as you request, to go over any questions or further information you might request as we go through this budget process. So tonight, what I want to do is update you a little bit on the budget model as we have it for the proposed 2007-2008 budget. Talk about some major debt issuance assumptions which become key to financing our capital improvements plan. And I'm going to go very light tonight on the major revenue forecasting assumptions and defer more of that discussion to the April 23rd work session as we roll out the budget, and that will provide updated numbers. It is part of the handout that you've received, and if you have questions on that, I'm willing to accept them now, or we can discuss it more further in a couple weeks. One thing I want to do this year in the budget process is to present the budget to the City Council in layers, and the importance of that is to make the budget maybe a little easier for all of us to understand as we go through, and also for the communication. The very first layer, and most of the discussion tonight, and I think a big part on April 23rd, is what I call the new money budget. But that is new revenue that comes in the upcoming fiscal year. The new sales taxes, the new user fees, and so forth. And by new, what I mean is those revenues that we receive each year. In a business environment, your annual income. And so that discussion is the primary discussion I want to have, so we can see just what money we're taking in each year and how we're spending that each year.
Can we ask you questions as you go?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay.
Please.
In reference to new money, is there a way for us to is there a way for us to identify which is the new money that wasn't there the year before in sales tax receipts?
Yes, sir.
So we can identify not just totals, but where they're coming from and how it differs from the year before?
Yes, that's part of the process of the new money. As we look at the forecasting, at the revenue forecasting model, we're going to show you, and there's a copy in this presentation. I'm not going to go over it much. It shows you what we estimated by revenue category, what we now expect it to be, and what we're projecting for next year, to give you an idea of how we're forecasting those revenues and what those parameters are. Okay. In addition, though, the second half of your question is, if we took in more money in 2006, 2007 than we included in the budget, how are we going to spend that money? And that part is the second tier or second layer of the budget, which I'm referring to as fund balance. That portion is the money that we did not spend this year because we took in more than we expected, or operating costs particularly costing less than what we expected. Keep in mind that your expenditure budget is a cap. You have to spend that or less. You always spend less. You never can go over it legally. So there always will be a surplus that you never spent that is available for reappropriation. And so that second layer is a discussion of how that money gets rolled into the budget. We will be having that discussion probably on the May 7th meeting that I'm proposing. The third layer is what we call carryovers. And what carryovers are a project that, for argument, we have $1 million project that we funded in the 2006-2007 budget. As of June 30th, we expect we will spend $300,000 on that project. Next year, we have to re-budget that project to spend the remaining $700,000. The reason I like to separate that money, I'm going to give you a better example of a project that we've been talking about and has been in its first budget now. I'm going to talk about the stadium project. This cost for the last 2 years really has not changed. It's been a $75 million project that's been talked about for 2 years in that dollar range. The 2006-2007 budget reflects $75 million for the stadium. It's consistent with what the City Council has approved. Between now and June 30th, we will have spent a very small portion of that as it's moving forward. So next year's budget, the 2007-2008 budget, will have in it somewhere $70 to $75 million on the stadium. We have to re-budget under Arizona state law. At June 30th of 2008, that project still will not be 100% complete. There will be some final work being done on the stadium. For argument, and I'm making the number up, let's assume that'll be $10 million going to 2008-2009. As you add these numbers up in the budget, that's $75 million from 2006-2007, $75 million from 2007-2008, another $10 million from 2008-2009, sounds like a $160 million project. No, it's still a $75 million project. As we go through in the budget terms, when people like me try to keep us legal and get the things in the budget, we talk about these projects, and that's what adds confusion to the whole process. The numbers get inflated. And so that layer of carryovers is where we deal with some of those types of projects. The final is other special projects. As an example for that, the West Core Mall Improvement District, it runs through our budget, it runs through our books, but it is something that is already committed and is legally restricted to those purposes, and we'll roll that in right on top to meet the budget law requirements. This year, as we've put the financial model together, we've expanded the emphasis on the capital improvements plan. We are trying to get more money over available for the various projects, whether it be employment corridor, Bullard Avenue type projects that you heard about earlier, the acceleration of City Center to get that in, infrastructure needed for related to a number of these projects. The list goes on, but the goal has been to try to increase the emphasis on the capital improvement plan. To do that, as a staff, we're recommending a strategical approach of converting portions of the primary property tax collections, by example, and using those amounts over to debt service so that we can increase the amount of general obligation bonds that we issue. We have a limitation put in the Arizona Constitution, in fact, just revised by the voters this last fall, that limits what our primary property tax levy can be. We also have a total limit of the property tax rate that we charge in all of our property taxes. Working those two together, we will combine the primary property tax levy at its maximum with the secondary property tax levy to get to that rate, which is $1.60. But part of the dollars, eventually we want to use all of the primary property tax dollars as debt service in addition to the secondary property tax. But we wanted to phase that in over a 5-year period of time. So for the 2007-2008 budget, we're proposing taking 20% of the primary property tax levy, applying that amount of dollars into debt service for additional bonds that we can use that'll facilitate an additional amount available for capital improvement projects. Considerations, I just wanted to bring out some of these as we've gone through this budget process. The considerations that have been included are very numerous. Of course, they include the matrix assessment, the information that we've received to date. They include information from the MSS assessment, which is the assessment on the IT services that we have, the information that we've received to date.
What's that? I'm sorry.
MSS is our technology assessment that is going on separately. And we've received the report on that and tried to factor in those recommendations as part of the budget process.
What does MSS actually stand for?
It's the name of a company.
Oh.
I'm sorry. No, it's a good question. I apologize for that.
Jesse, do you know the name of the company?
I think that is, yeah.
Okay. Fill in the blanks, I guess, yourself. MSS, okay.
The City Council received a report from the Public Safety Advisory Committee. One of those recommendations that I remember is very consistent with the conversion of some operating money over to capital is the need for facilities, especially for the police department. Capital needs, again, that has been a theme as we've gone through this process. And the final one is developer contributions. With the annexation of the Sonoran planning area, a number of development agreements that we have, the complexity of the developer contributions in our budget process, both from an operating standpoint and from a capital standpoint, is increasing greatly. And that'll be folded in, as I described earlier, as one of the layers on the budget. We're still working on a lot of the details to see how that'll apply, especially with the Sonoran Valley annexation.
Larry,
Yes, sir.
Quick question back to the primary property tax conversion. Are you going to illustrate that later on in the presentation?
Let me do it now, and then see if between now and some of the other comments that I have.
Okay.
Our primary property tax levy, maximum levy for next year, will be approximately $4 million. Okay. We will take, no, I'm going to use $5 million for this purpose because the math is easier.
Can I save you the time?
Yes.
Can you illustrate it in writing to us?
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay,
Sorry.
I can do that.
Sorry.
And as we go through.
I won't follow you on your numbers.
Right. Okay.
So, okay. Just as an example. I'm kind of
okay.
curious to see.
And we'll see if I have it in there as I'm going through this presentation. The financial, the financial model is consistent. If you recall, a year and a half ago, as we were talking about, actually it's about a year ago now, as we were talking about the stadium project and the I-10 widening. How are we going to pay for these as they're coming in? And we developed a model called the revolving fund model. and we reviewed it with you. The revolving fund model we presented then is included within all of the framework that we have, all of this financial model, and has not changed significantly, especially as it relates to those two projects over that time frame.
When does the STA money come in?
The STA money starts coming in, I believe, in 2017. It is about 10 years down the road. But the bond financing to fund the stadium, we've already got them working, our finance team is already working on the various bond issues, and they will come to you probably 3 different issues before the city council over the next 6 to 8 months. So with that, all of that having been said, and as we go through this budget process, part of what I wanted to do tonight is to kind of give you a very broad overview of what we expect next year's budget to look like. This, keep in mind, is all new money, as I defined it earlier. And to give you a perspective, the $105 million that you see as a total new money in the adopted budget for 2006-2007, the total budget that you adopted actually was closer to $480 million. So the remaining $380 million is those layers that I was describing earlier, and that's what complicates the budget process. So for this upcoming year, the operating revenues, we're expecting an increase by about $14 million. Operating revenues are generally the primary property tax, the user fees, the sales tax. Those are receiving a pretty healthy increase at this point in time. Construction sales tax. The budget for this year was about $14 million. The expectation for next year is $22 million. One of the reasons is we're coming in considerably higher than budget for this current year. As we talk more about the revenue estimating, we'll talk about building permits. We're still receiving the higher numbers from the accelerated building permits because you get that construction sales tax money at closing on residential. But the commercial you get on a monthly basis, and the commercial hasn't started hitting yet for the expansion that we're witnessing the start of. And so we're projecting that we'll continue at the current rates because of higher commercial or non-residential construction sales tax over the next year. The secondary property tax, using the $1.60 rate, we're projecting that'll increase to approximately $6.6 million for this next year. And then the development impact fees we're projecting at about $14.6 million. So with that, and this is where my formula gets, this is where the new money portion of all of this gets extremely complicated. The bond proceeds that are new that we haven't already contemplated for this next year's budget are approximately $22 million. And that's an important statement because we've already contemplated an additional $40 million in GO bond proceeds that were actually included in the 2005-2006 budget. So when I call them new money, they don't even show in the 2006-2007 budget calculation. But $22 million is the money we expect to be able to add from the new revenues that are available for this next budget year.
Due to the new limitations?
Due to the new limitations, also due to new revenues and the adjustment of the primary property tax of close to $1 million in debt service going away from the operating side and over to the capital side to the debt service side to make more money available for capital. Okay. Graphically, what do our revenues look like? You can see the bulk of our revenues, of new revenues throughout the year, and I did not include bond proceeds in there because that can heavily distort it. But $89 million of the total budget, and the large part of the pie, approximately 2/3 of the pie, is coming from our operating revenues. Additional $22 million coming from construction sales tax, a number that, as we go forward, may be a volatile number as the slowdowns in building permits hit, and therefore that money is used for capital purposes. The secondary property tax is very restricted in what it can be used for. It can only be used to pay for the bonds on general obligation bonds, the debt service on it, and the development impact fees are restricted in what they can be used for. So you see with that the need to divert some of that $89 million over for capital purposes to allow us more flexibility to get these projects done. So with that having been said, what do we expect the budget to look like this upcoming year? Again, talking about using the new money only. The operating expenditures, in spite of the transition that I described of moving about 20% of our primary property tax from operating expenditures down to the debt service line item, just move down of one line item of about $1 million, we're still expecting an increase in our operating expenditures for the upcoming year by approximately $12 million in total. The debt service is increasing by about $4 million, $1.5 million of which is already on the books. We also will be selling bonds yet this spring, some general obligation bonds, to pay for projects that have already started, but we're trying to fund cash as far as we can to keep our interest obligations down. The revolving fund, we budgeted $2.5 million for the revolving fund for 2006-2007. As you recall, the revolving fund is used to pay for the costs of the stadium, the debt service costs of the stadium, as well as for the I-10 widening. Of that $2.5 million that we budgeted for 2006-07, we're only going to spend $130,000. So there's $2.4 million that we are not going to spend. When we adopted last year's budget, we knew that. But this year, we're going to need more money, and over the next 3 years, we're going to need more money because of spikes in the I-10 widening cost. Therefore, the $3.5 million that I show in 07-08, that's money we're adding to the 2.4. So new money is 3.5. We have 2.4 already. That'll give us a total of 5.9 this year. Very consistent, exactly consistent with what we proposed to you a year ago as we talked about the revolving fund. The capital improvement plan, as far... Yes, sir.
Last year, when you proposed this, how did it come out? Did it come out about the same ratio as this? You did this last year.
Yes.
This time, and you proposed that there would be this much above what you would need for the operating fund. And how did that, in reality, how did that come out?
In the reality, our expectation is the operating expenditures will be below that budget, as they are required to by each of the departments. And so we will spend less than the $67.5 million. I'm going on memory. I apologize. It sticks in my mind that our estimate on that was somewhere about 5% lower for the whole city.
Just because I know what you gave.
Yeah.
The exacts, but I just wondered how that went from year to year with the estimates, how much below that was. Yeah. Okay, very good.
Capital improvements plan, as a result of the efforts that we're trying to do, about $46 million we expect to be available in the capital improvements plan. And then the other expenditures, which are miscellaneous type developer reimbursements, are included in there. One-time capital expenditures that aren't really in the capital improvement plan, and a number of other costs. We're expecting those to remain about the same. So what are the primary assumptions that we're using for issuance of bonds? Because that, as you know, has a very important determination of how much capital becomes available. the debt issuance assumptions that are currently in our financial model are primary property tax over to debt service, again, 20% for fiscal year 2007, 2008. What that means, very simply, is that we're taking $1 million of our primary property tax, moving it from an operating expenditure line item to a debt service line item, which will allow us to borrow an additional $10 million for capital projects today. So we're leveraging $1 million to get 10. Now that $1 million happens every year. The concept that we're talking about going forward is that next year we'll take 40% instead of 20% and apply that. So over the next 5 years, we're going to phase in until 100% of the primary property tax is able to be leveraged for these capital projects. And that's really recognizing the large number of projects that we have as we're going forward.
How many years would that take?
5 years to implement.
That's assuming that primary property tax revenue doesn't. Sorry, if you're always taking 20%, it's not necessarily going to be just $1 million every year.
That is correct.
It might be 1.2, it might be 1.3.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in fact, the model does contemplate that. That's a very good point. It starts at $1 million in year one. In year two, that number is probably $1.2 million for each of the 20%, so it's a total of $2.4 million instead of just the $1 million, which is, I think, your point. Because that total property tax is going up as we add more assessed valuation.
Yeah, you're always chasing a ceiling if you're always chipping away 20% every year.
Well, we will, but the 20% will go to 100. It won't be 20% of the remaining. It'll be 20% of the total in year one, 40% of the total in year two, and so forth. So we will catch it in the fifth year. The repayment schedule currently is for 15 years. You asked about that. Councilman Antoniak asked about that at the last meeting. I have done some research with our financial advisors, and with the markets, the way they're looking at this point in time, where there's relatively flat, what's called a yield curve, which says that your short-term rates, the difference between your short-term rates and your long-term rates aren't as much as they normally are. That to go out 20 years would make a lot of sense. That will also provide more leverage, as you had suggested, which we should be able to increase the amount going to the capital projects over the next 5 years by doing that. By just roughly estimate right now about $20 to $30 million over the next 5 years.
Say that again, 20 to 30 million.
20 to $30 million more capital, more bond sales in principal by using the longer payment terms instead of the 15 years. Well, 15 years is that's Goodyear's history. Goodyear has always borrowed at 15 years.
And statute allows us to go to 20 years?
Yes, it does.
And
Actually, statutes will allow you to go to 40 years. Where you run into the issue is where it makes economic sense. And the second is it gets very frustrating as you're down the road paying for infrastructure or facilities that no longer exist.
Yeah.
So you want to balance that a little bit as you're putting it together.
What other cities in the valley?
Many of them use 15, some go out 20, there are some at 25. City of Phoenix, I was looking through their debt report the other day, and they've got them varying from 15 to 25 years depending on the particular financing that they're doing. And we might do some of that with water and sewer infrastructure tending to be more longer term, as facilities may be a little shorter term, and various in between.
Right. Yeah, you could be doing
so
all.
basically,
yeah.
infrastructure you have in, and then you're still paying on that, and then you have to redo that infrastructure. So at the same time,
right, and that's what we want to avoid when you get too long. Absolutely.
I'd be curious. I don't know how much homework it would take, but Gilbert and Chandler experienced very similar kind of growth that we're experiencing right now, probably 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
my understanding of Chandler is that they're now largely built out and they're doing infill projects, and that's creating some stress on the finances.
Because they're still paying on the original.
I would make the assumption that that's the case, but I'd be curious to see if there was any thought process, maybe if there was some history to the 15 or 20 years ago in some of those cities, and now they're reaching that point. And what are the stresses? Are they, in fact, our meter's breaking, and they're still paying for that meter that's broken and having to replace it?
Actually, the financial advisor that we use has been the financial advisor for the city of Chandler for a number of years.
Great, you can ask the question.
Or is that bond counsel? Mesa is the financial advisor. Bond counsel is bond counsel for Chandler and has been. And we do, as we go through these processes, we obviously tap on the resources of other communities in doing it. I think the importance of the question that you raised in the capital improvement plan process, and as we go forward, is that you as a group ask these questions, that we have these dialogues as we're selling these bonds and as we're planning the bonds, because they're very good questions. Often as finance people, we tend to be very conservative. We try to do it over a 15-year period of time to get them paid off quickly. The interest rate that we've assumed is 4%, which is today's market. That rate, as you know, can be changing, and that will change the amount of principal that are available. And the one concept we're trying to do different, instead of selling the bonds before the project start, we're trying to sell the bonds as we have the project encumbered, when it's under contract, so that we are spending the money and incurring the debt service only when the projects are actually moving and the project's getting in the ground. Save us some debt service in the long term, also keeps us from having to deal with other tax-exempt debt arbitrage issues that get more complicated. There's another limitation.
If I may,
yes, sir.
That doesn't give us a problem with how we sell these and what percentage, so that by doing it that way, you don't know, I mean, you are taking a chance, and you don't know what that rate is at that time.
We have to manage a number of variables such as that. You're correct that one of those is interest rate risk that could be happening in that time frame. The second, though, is that with the cash, we want to make sure that we do not run into troubles with selling too many bonds, which the tax-exempt requirements of the IRS can impact it. So there's a lot of variables in that formula that we try to use, but we want to emphasize more replenishment of funds. And we'll go through that in more depth as we get closer to issuing some bonds here in the next month or two. The next limitation I wanted to bring to you, because there are really three limitations on what we do to issue bonds. First one is the amount of available to pay debt service. The second limitation is the amount that the voters have authorized. And this schedule shows that we have $254 million or $255 million of authorization bonds, that's the middle column, remaining authorization, have not been issued as of this point in time. We've committed about $40 million of that, which leaves us about $215 million for future bond issues. So that's a second constraint. We cannot issue general obligation bonds without voter approval. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question while you're on that?
Yes, sir.
If we're talking about a public safety facility and port facility in the near term, does that fall under public buildings, library, and technology, or does that fall under public safety?
The interpretation I've received from bond counsel is that the public administration, public safety facilities can fall under the public safety category.
We better be thinking about going out and getting voter approval pretty soon then.
Yeah.
We have, yes, on those issues, yes, you're right there. And some of those voter approvals were issued, transportation being another one, and streets.
Right.
That those issues we kept lower at that time when we did that approval, because they were in the 6% category, but the voters just moved those categories up. So that's a very valid point that we should follow up on and strategize as to the timing.
Yeah, because it's not far off.
Right. Okay. And the final slide that I want to go through tonight, if it's all right with you tonight, is the other debt issuance limitations that exist. First, we have a limitation based on our property tax available, in other words, the debt service to pay on the bonds. If you will, that is a self-imposed limitation that shows that total new bond sales for the next or between this spring and next fiscal year, we have available about $58.5 million for bonds. That does reflect the shift in property tax that I've been describing previously from primary over to secondary. If we did not include that, that number would be about $10 million less, about $48 million instead of the $58 million. The other is we have constitutional limitations of what our debt can be. Certain types of bonds can only be at the 6% category. Others can be at an additional 20% of the assessed valuation. We have remaining, as of this point in time, approximately $140 million that we could issue. So we could not issue, even if we knew how to pay for it, we could not issue the whole $240 million remaining that the voter approval has given us at one time. We have to keep within those limitations. With that, the rest that I have is about the revenue assumptions, which I would prefer that we have that dialogue on April 23rd. Although I'll take questions on that or anything else tonight if you'd like. But I'm competing with Ohio State and Florida, and they're a lot more exciting, quite frankly.
Where is that game?
In Atlanta.
So started?
Oh, I don't
What is
care.
it? Started 20 minutes ago? Nobody's keeping track back there, are they?
What is
Of the time that is.
Any questions?
You've done great, though, Larry. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank
That
you.
was,
Comments, questions?
no, I just thought it was put a little more simply this time. I was
It's
able to
very clear,
comprehend
wasn't
that. I thought it was very well done. Thank you.
Inside, anything?
I just would like to further understand the risks inherent with going from 15 to 20, and I think we will over time. But $20 to $30 million in more capacity is. I mean, I look at what we have currently in capacity, and it's an awful good start at the City Center project, or an awful good start at some of these other projects we've been discussing. And so I'd like to entertain that option.
Okay, the assets, however, I agree. The assets which we're acquiring are 30 to 50-year assets.
Right, like a city center is a 30 to 50-year asset.
And the water's 20 to 30, probably, I guess. I don't know.
Depending on the type of pipe.
Yeah. Okay, anything from council, staff? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.